But on this episode, I want to go back in time to the debates over the taxing power under the Constitution in 1787 and 88 in comparison to what they had under the Articles of Confederation. Under the new proposal supported by Alexander Hamilton and the Federalists, this was taxing power from the federal government either directly or indirectly to individuals, versus the previous system supported or defended by people like Patrick Henry and the Anti-Federalists, where it was Congress making a request of the states, and then the states going out and collecting taxes and then fulfilling those requests, or at least supposedly that's how it was supposed to work. And that was a big complaint, one of the main reasons why they actually went to propose a new constitution. But I'll get to all that in just a moment. First of all, just a quick overview of the system under the Articles of Confederation from an article by Dave Benner. He said, under that system, all funding for Congress would be based upon a system of apportionment, where the states would be assigned a sum of money in direct proportion, quote, to the value of all land within each state. From there, Dave writes, the states would enact laws to raise the funds in ways that were conducive to their own constitutional systems. This arrangement for raising funds became known as the requisition system. And Dave is actually citing Article 8 of the Articles of Confederation, where it says United States and Congress assembled shall, have a common treasury, which shall be supplied by the several states in proportion to the value of all land within each state. And it goes on and says the structure of how they're going to come up with the money or the amount. And then it says the taxes for paying that proportion shall be laid and levied by the authority and direction of the legislatures of the several states within the time agreed upon by the United States and Congress assembled. So Congress, short version, TLDR, Congress says this is how much you're supposed to pay, and this is when it's due. And then the states would go out, depending on the political, economic, social, whatever situation in each state, they would go out and then go and collect the amount that they were supposed to remit. Now, this was seen by many in the Federalist camp as one of the primary reasons for needing a new constitution, 1786, 87 or so. And one of the reasons that historians point this out so often is because James Madison, father of the Constitution, in April of 1787, just before the Philadelphia Convention, he put together in his notes, preparing for what they wanted to do next, what he called the vices, the primary vices in the current system. I will link to this and everything else that I'm mentioning in this episode in the show notes. I publish a blog post about 1 to 2 hours after the live stream is done, so you can find all the different platforms. Are on both video and audio platforms, plus all the stuff that I'm mentioning, so you could read it in context and learn more on your own time. So, for example, Vices in the Current System by James Madison, the very first thing that he mentioned is this. 1, failure of the states to comply with the constitutional requisitions. That doesn't mean that Madison thought that that was the number one reason, but it certainly was the first thing he wrote down. And he said, this evil, the failure to pay the requisitions, Madison called it an evil. This evil, and he wasn't alone at all. We'll get to more of these in a moment. This evil has been so fully experienced both during the war and since the peace, results so naturally from the number and independent authority of the states, and has been so uniformly exemplified in every similar confederacy that it may be considered as not less radically and permanently inherent in than it is fatal to the object of the present system. So he's basically saying, like, look, we've got this process, and based on the structure of it, this is what's going to happen. They're just not going to pay. And so they wanted to change that around. Gordon Lloyd puts it like this in constitutingamerica.org. One reason for the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia in 1787 was to secure a reliable source of revenue for the federal government. And requisitions, you can see them mentioned over and over and over in the Federalist Papers as a failure, a vice, an evil, things like that, primarily by Hamilton, but also Madison, starting around Federalist Paper number 15 or so. But they were far from alone. Others on the Federalist side certainly did not like the system. Oliver Ellsworth in the Connecticut Ratifying Convention said, since the close of the war, some of the states have done nothing towards complying with the requisitions of Congress. Others who did something at first, seeing that they were left to bear the whole burden, have become equally remiss. So the argument is basically like, why are these people getting away with not paying their fair share, in essence? And that's kind of what we hear out of Massachusetts, which actually ran into some other problems that I'll get to in a moment as well. Federalists like Rufus King pointed out that Massachusetts was paying. Why wasn't everybody else? And you got to change this around. And he said Massachusetts has paid while other states have been delinquent. How was the war carried on with the paper money? Requisitions on the states for that money were made. Who paid them? Massachusetts and a few others. He said the other states have shamefully neglected to pay their quotas. Do you ask for redress? You are scoffed at. So the argument is everybody can pay, but because we're allowing them in this system to just make a choice and not do it, and there's no way to coerce them because Congress had no enforcement mechanism. The states were the enforcement mechanism, and they could comply, or, well, if they didn't, nothing was going to happen to them. So their argument is basically without coercion, without force, without central power saying you're going to do it, we shouldn't be surprised that this is what happened. And maybe they were correct, but there was a different view as well. And I'll get to that as well. Edmund Randolph thought it was more of a problem than just one state paying and another state not, or only partially paying. It was more of a problem than just not having enough funds on hand. He thought it was going to lead to war and total chaos, basically. He said, a reliance on congressional requisitions would leave the country exposed and open to those who should choose to invade us. I mean, I'm not sure if he's just fear-mongering or if he really believed this. His concern was if we can't raise money, someone's going to see us as weak, and then they're going to come in and take over. He said, or it's going to lead to such sedition and confusion among ourselves as must subvert and destroy every object of human society. And even if they were correct on the problems with this, I think this is kind of a little bit of hyperbole, but both sides certainly used a lot of that. Alexander Hamilton put it this way in the New York Ratifying Convention, June 1788. Again, I'm going to link to all this stuff in the show notes so you can read it yourself. Hamilton said, requisitions have been the cause of a principal part of our calamities. The system is defective and rotten and ought forever to be banished from our government. Forever to be banished from our government. He absolutely got his wish on that one. They were absolutely banished. Now, we have some numbers on what was requested versus what was received by Congress. Partly thanks to Alexander Hamilton. Once he was in the Treasury, he put together some numbers. So I've got a chart here from articles1781.com through the Internet Archive. Again, I will link to that in the show notes so you can just add up all the numbers. Basically, it's not all complete data, but basically from 1781 to 88, we've got the numbers requested. And then from 82 to 89, how much Hamilton recorded as being paid. And if you do the math just on that, it's about 25%, 23% of specie and 28% of indent requisitions. And you can read about that on this link to learn what those are. So basically about a quarter if you just take the raw numbers. But, and there's a huge but on this, they point out that this is not the whole story. Why? Because Congress later admitted that they requested way too much. For example, the requisition for 1782 had been grossly excessive, both from the standpoint of need and the ability of states to pay. We know that the British pretty much just stopped all the fighting after Yorktown, September 1781. So then the need for military funding went way down. And then in 1784, Congress conceded that around 4 million would have sufficed for 3 years of 1782, 83, and 84 versus the almost 14 million, almost more than triple that it requested. So they requested around 4.16. They requested 13.87, really only needed 4.16. They grossly over-requested in 1782. So if we reduce all those numbers, we get a calculation somewhere between 35 and 48%, which some of the opponents of the new system, even if they weren't fully in favor of the requisition system, there weren't too many of those, but we'll get to Patrick Henry on that in a moment. They were just saying, look, this isn't too bad based on the scenario that we've all been living in. We've just went through this incredible war against the largest empire in the history of the globe. We actually won with some help, and it's going to take some time to dig out from under this. Is it so crazy that we haven't been able to pay all the taxes that have been requested? Here's Melancton Smith in the New York Ratifying Convention. He uses different numbers for a longer period. I have not been able to verify which ones are correct on this. But he said, if I calculate right, the requisitions for the 10 years past versus 7 to 8 or so, whatever the numbers are, have amounted to $36 million, of which 24 or 2/3 have actually been paid. So he's saying, well, if we look at a bigger time period than what I'm looking at, and he's not debating me, but if we look at this full time period, we've got about 2/3. Is that terrible? Let's say it was only 50%. He said, besides, will any gentleman say that the states have generally been able to collect more than 2/3 of their taxes from the people? Indeed, it is my decided opinion that no government in the difficult circumstances which we have passed through will be able to realize more than 2/3 of the taxes it imposes. So on the one side, you're getting the argument from the Federalists that said, well, things are falling apart. People are going to invade us. We're going to have all kinds of calamity because Congress can't operate. It can't do anything. It's totally ineffectual. And the system is ineffectual. And they're not taking into account, or maybe they're taking advantage of it, the situation, the scenario where it's difficult for the people after many years of war to be able to cough up the loot so quickly to pay it off. Or maybe there was just too much debt. And on the other side, we're hearing from people like Melancton Smith, like, hey, we're not actually doing too bad in consideration of the circumstances. And William Grayson in Virginia made pretty much the same case. He said, since the peace, there have been various causes for not furnishing the necessary quotas to the general government. He's not even debating the fact that, or the numbers that are requested. He's not even saying that they're too high or too low. He's just saying, okay, you're requesting this, and there are a number of cases of why, number of causes. In some of the flourishing states, he said, the requisitions have been attended to. In others, their noncompliance is to be attributed more to the inability of the people than to their unwillingness to advance the general interest. The argument was, well, especially if we're listening to what Rufus King had to say, we're paying. Why aren't they? They're screwing us over. They're ripping us off. And you get all these jealousies between the states, and there is an argument to be made that that was actually happening. So you were getting some level of political conflict there. But Massachusetts went to some pretty extreme measures to raise some money, and they ran into some problems, and Grayson pointed that out. Maybe these other states didn't want to go through this. Massachusetts, he said, attempted to correct the nature of things by extracting more from the people than they were able to part with. What did it produce? A revolution which shook that state to its center. Another revolution just years after the War for Independence. And that was Shays. And that was seen as a serious, serious problem. But on one side, it was a problem for not having a strong central government. On the other hand, it was what Grayson's saying. They're trying to extract too much money. And when you do that, you're going to have resistance. And here's Grayson again in the Virginia Ratifying Convention. If requisitions have not been complied with, it must be owing to Congress, who might have put the unpopular debts on the back land. So if you're going to require us to pay all these debts, maybe we can't. He said, commutation is abhorrent to New England ideas. Speculation is abhorrent to the eastern states. Those inconveniences have resulted from the bad policy of Congress. And he's almost hinting at, and I'm not sure if and I haven't read as much from him as I would like to, but I'm not sure if he's in the same camp, but he's basically setting the foundation for what Patrick Henry said, not just in defense of it's not as bad as what you're telling us, Federalists and Hamilton and Randolph, etc. It's not just that it's not as bad. The requisition system is an essential good in the system. It was Patrick Henry. And that's kind of what Grayson is getting at here as well. The inconveniences have resulted from the bad policy of Congress. So it's in essence a way of keeping Congress in check. And that's exactly what Patrick Henry said. I think this is June 7th, 1788. He said, requisitions which gentlemen affect to despise have nothing degrading in them. On this depends our political prosperity. I mean, that's far more than just saying, well, it's not working as we wanted it to. You're not getting as much money, and we're running into problems, and here's why. Let's let it keep rolling. Stop rushing it. Stop trying to collect so much money. Things are okay. He's saying, no, this is an essential part of the foundation of our system. The principal pillar, or it depends on this depends our political prosperity. Incredibly important is the requisition system. He said, I will never give up that darling word requisitions. My country may give it up. A majority may wrest it from me, but I will never give it up till my grave. And why? Because just like what Grayson was saying, it's the system where the states and the people of the states could keep Congress in check. When Congress can enact taxation policies that go directly to individuals or indirectly, then the states really aren't part of that process. But when they are, they can interpose much more easily or much less difficulty in doing that and create a system where it keeps the government in check. And he said requisitions are attended with one singular advantage. They are attended by deliberation. They secure to the states the benefit of correcting oppressive errors. If our assembly thought requisitions erroneous, if they thought the demand was too great, they might at least supplicate Congress to reconsider that it was a little too much. And Henry, again, in the Virginia Ratifying Convention, he summed it up with this one. He said, that incorrigible, it's a longer kind of a section here, but I think it's really important, so I'll read it out to you. That incorrigible gentleman, being a child of the Revolution, must recollect with gratitude the glorious effects of requisitions. Again, not just saying it's not as bad as what you're telling us. He's full-hearted in support of the requisition system because it keeps Congress in check, and it was an essential part of the American Revolution. He said, it is an idea that must be grateful to every American. An English army was sent to compel us to pay money contrary to our consent, to force us by arbitrary and tyrannical coercion to satisfy their unbounded demands. And if you think about this, it's very similar to the type of position that he was taking in response to the Stamp Act. So here is 1788, almost the same view as he was having in 1765 when he was 29 years old. And he said, you know, this Stamp Act, this is a tax directly on the people. And you're not authorized to do that. The only people who could do that are our own representatives, so we can at least have some level of consent to that. And if they try to do it anyway, you're not bound to obey them. Disobey them, refuse, resist, etc. And so he's talking about the same process here, describing the revolution. He said, we wished to pay with our own consent. Rather than pay against our consent, we engaged in that bloody contest which terminated so gloriously. He said, by requisitions we pay with our own consent. By the means we have triumphed in the most arduous struggle that ever tried the virtue of man. We fought then for what we are contending for now, to prevent an arbitrary deprivation of our property, contrary to our consent and inclination. And there's a lot more in that speech that I do encourage you to read. It's really interesting stuff. Of course, I will link to it in the show notes at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path-to-liberty. And if you enjoyed this show, you want to help us get this kind of information, this historical knowledge out to more and more people, nothing helps us get this job done more than the financial faith and support of our members. You can join us for as little as $2 a month over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. Again, I really appreciate you being here. I hope you enjoyed the episode. I hope you learned something more important than anything. I hope it was educational. I hope you have an awesome weekend, and I hope to see you next week here on the Path to Liberty.